She was the face of justice in her Alabama town, a respected judge revered for her sharp intellect and unwavering commitment to the law. Faith stood as a symbol of fairness, a beacon of authority in her community. But behind the gavel and the accolades, she harbored a secret so dark, so twisted, that it would unravel everything. This wasn't just a story of betrayal, it was one that shook her family and her entire community to its core. What happens when the very person sworn to uphold justice becomes the architect of the ultimate injustice? Faith's tale is one of obsession, greed, and an almost chilling willingness to destroy the life she built, all for the sake of a deadly affair. A magistrate judge, a convicted felon, a devoted police officer husband, and a murder-for-hire plot so calculated that it left the nation reeling. Before we unravel this deeply disturbing tale, take a moment to like and subscribe to Shocking True Crime Stories. We're diving into the darkest corners of human behavior, and this is one story you won't soon forget. Faith Reynolds was a name synonymous with justice in her Alabama community. As a magistrate judge, she had spent years cultivating an image of fairness, intelligence, and unwavering dedication to the law. Her courtroom demeanor was sharp yet compassionate, her judgments respected by colleagues and the community alike. Faith had become a pillar of her town, a symbol of what integrity and diligence could achieve. Her husband, Mark Reynolds, was equally admired. As a police officer, Mark was the epitome of selflessness, dedicating his life to protecting others. His calm demeanor and tireless commitment to his job earned him respect not only among his peers but also from the people he served. Together, Faith and Mark seemed like the perfect couple, two individuals bound by shared values, working to uphold justice in their respective roles. Their 19-year marriage appeared solid, a relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. They had faced life's ups and downs together, weathering challenges with grace. To those around them, their love seemed unshakable, a testament to the strength of their partnership. Their family was often described as picture-perfect. Faith and Mark's 3 children were well-behaved, excelling in school and participating in community activities. Their household was the kind that neighbors envied, a place filled with laughter, warmth, and the unmistakable bond of a loving family. Faith often spoke proudly of her children, weaving anecdotes about their accomplishments into conversations with colleagues and friends. The Reynolds family was a fixture in their town, their presence a source of inspiration. Friends and neighbors admired their dynamic, believing they embodied the ideals of what a family could and should be. Faith and Mark seemed to have it all, a strong marriage, thriving careers, and a home filled with love. But as the saying goes, appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the polished veneer of their seemingly perfect life, cracks had begun to form, small, almost imperceptible at first. Faith, the steadfast judge, and Mark, the dedicated officer, were about to face a darkness no one could have anticipated. A darkness that would reveal just how far Faith was willing to go to satisfy her desires, leaving a trail of betrayal and devastation in its wake. It started innocently enough, or so Faith Reynolds told herself. One late evening, scrolling through her Facebook account, Faith came across a name she hadn't thought about in years, Caleb Foster. His profile picture was nondescript, a blurry image of a prison yard, but the name tugged at her memory. Caleb had been a case she'd come across early in her career, a convicted murderer serving a life sentence for a brutal crime. Out of curiosity, she clicked on his profile. What began as a professional curiosity quickly turned into something more. Faith sent a message, a simple note, "I didn't expect to see you here." Caleb responded almost immediately, his tone casual but laced with charm. "Even inmates get Facebook these days," he joked. "You'd be surprised what the system allows." The first few exchanges were innocent enough, discussions about his case, life behind bars, and her work as a judge. But as the days turned into weeks, their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Caleb had a way with words, his charisma seeping through the screen. He praised Faith's intellect, calling her brilliant and unique. He made her feel seen in a way Mark hadn't in years. At first, Faith dismissed it as harmless. It's just conversation, she told herself. But the messages became a nightly ritual. After putting her children to bed and making sure Mark was asleep, Faith would retreat to the quiet of her office, her phone lighting up with Caleb's name. Caleb, for his part, knew exactly what he was doing. He was a man who had spent years studying people, learning their weaknesses. Faith, with her structured life and polished image, was an easy mark. He began to chip away at her contentment, asking probing questions that made her question everything. "Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions?" he asked one night. Faith hesitated before replying. "Sometimes." "You deserve more than sometimes," he wrote back. "You deserve to feel alive." Caleb's words stuck with her. Slowly, Faith began to see her life through his lens. The structured days, the predictable nights, it all started to feel suffocating. Mark, once her partner and confidant, now seemed distant and dull in comparison to the fire Caleb ignited in her. As their exchanges grew more intimate, Caleb began to plant seeds of an idea, carefully and deliberately. He told her she was special, different from anyone he'd ever met. "If I weren't stuck in here, we'd be unstoppable together," he wrote one night. The words sent a thrill through Faith, a dangerous mix of excitement and validation. Caleb was patient, waiting for the moment Faith was ready to take the next step. When she finally confessed her growing dissatisfaction with Mark, Caleb seized the opportunity. "Why stay in a life that doesn't make you happy?" he asked. "We could have a real future together, if only he weren't in the way." Faith hesitated. The suggestion was subtle, almost innocuous, but it lingered in her mind long after their conversation ended. Over the next few weeks, Caleb's influence over her deepened. He painted vivid pictures of the life they could have together, free of Mark, free of the constraints that held her back. "You've built your life around rules and control," Caleb told her one night. "But rules are meant to be broken, Faith. Don't you want to feel alive?" Faith, now fully ensnared, began to lead a double life. By day, she was the respected judge, presiding over cases with her usual poise and professionalism. But by night, she became someone else entirely, a woman consumed by obsession, texting and calling a convicted murderer, feeding a fantasy that grew darker with each passing day. She started staying up late, sometimes until the early hours of the morning, staring at her phone, waiting for Caleb's replies. She'd glance over her shoulder, ensuring Mark and the children didn't catch her. Her once meticulous attention to her family began to slip. Mark noticed her growing distance but chalked it up to stress from her demanding job. As Caleb's grip on her tightened, Faith's life became a facade. Her role as a judge, her marriage, her family, all of it felt like a performance, a mask she wore to hide the chaos brewing beneath the surface. She told herself that what she had with Caleb was real, that he was the one person who truly understood her. But Caleb wasn't interested in understanding. He was interested in control. And Faith, blinded by her obsession, was falling deeper into his web, her once structured world crumbling as she entertained the unthinkable. A life with Caleb, free of Mark, no matter the cost. Faith Reynolds wasn't sure when the line between fantasy and reality blurred. At first, her late-night exchanges with Caleb Foster felt like an escape, a thrilling detour from the monotony of her carefully constructed life. But then the texts became something else entirely, something dangerous. Caleb had a way with words, painting vivid pictures of the life they could have together. But it wasn't just his promises of freedom and passion that consumed her, it was the way he talked about her. Their conversations turned intimate, then explicitly sexual, a side of Caleb that Faith found exhilarating. He described in detail the things he would do to her if he weren't confined by prison walls. His words were raw, unfiltered, and unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Faith had never felt so desired, so seen. It was intoxicating. One night, Caleb texted her, "If you were here right now, I'd have you pinned against the wall. You'd forget everything but me." Faith's pulse quickened as she read his words, her hands trembling as she typed back. For someone who had spent her life adhering to rules and appearances, Caleb's audacity was a revelation. He didn't just want her, he wanted to claim her, to make her his entirely. The more they sexted, the harder it became for Faith to see her life with Mark as anything but a cage. Caleb wasn't just offering her passion, he was offering her freedom, or so she believed. When he began hinting that Mark was the only thing standing in their way, Faith's resolve wavered. At first, she resisted. Murder was unthinkable, a betrayal of everything she stood for. But Caleb didn't give up. "If you really want me," he texted one night, "then why let him keep us apart? You're stronger than this, Faith. You know what needs to be done." Faith reread his words over and over, her heart pounding. The thought of removing Mark, of finally being free to explore the life Caleb promised, became more appealing with each passing day. Caleb stoked the flames, feeding her fantasies with promises of a love so consuming it would make her feel alive in a way she never had before. It was during one particularly explicit exchange that Faith made her decision. Caleb described the life they could have, the nights of unbridled passion, the mornings filled with the kind of intimacy she'd never known. His words left her breathless, her mind racing. "I'll do it," she finally typed, her fingers trembling. "But it has to be perfect. No mistakes." With Caleb's encouragement, Faith began crafting her plan. She approached it the way she handled her cases in court, methodically, with precision and an unrelenting focus on eliminating risk. Caleb guided her every step of the way, his manipulation masterful, his control over her complete. The first step was finding someone to do the job. Faith knew she couldn't afford to get her hands dirty, and she needed someone who could be trusted to carry out the act without leaving a trail. That's when she turned to Mr. Harris, the well-respected school principal with a secret life. By day, Harris was the embodiment of respectability, a man who shaped young minds with care and dedication. But by night, he brokered hitmen for those who needed problems solved discreetly. Faith had heard whispers about his side business and knew he was exactly the person she needed. Their meeting took place in Faith's chambers, under the pretense of discussing a school safety initiative. But once the door closed, Faith wasted no time. "I have a situation I need handled," she said, her voice steady but cold. Harris didn't flinch. "Situations like this come with a price," he replied. "Money isn't an issue," Faith assured him. "You'll get what you need, and more. I can provide firearms and a significant payout once the job is done." Through Harris, Faith hired a man known only as D. She provided him with a meticulously detailed plan, using her legal expertise to anticipate and eliminate potential pitfalls. Faith handed over Mark's stolen firearms as part of D's payment, claiming she needed them for protection at home. Mark had trusted her explanation without question, unaware of the betrayal brewing under his own roof. Faith also supplied D with videos of their home, captured on her phone when Mark was at work. The footage was chillingly thorough, highlighting security blind spots and mapping out Mark's daily routines. To ensure the hitman had transportation that wouldn't arouse suspicion, Faith devised one of her boldest moves. She handed over her car, telling Mark it needed repairs. D would use the vehicle to commit the crime, and Faith even fabricated a receipt from a non-existent repair shop to complete the ruse. As the plan took shape, Faith's double life deepened. By day, she was the same sharp, respected judge the community had always known. But by night, she was a woman consumed by obsession, her nights filled with sexting Caleb and plotting the murder of her husband. Caleb's encouragement never wavered. "Once he's gone," he told her, "you'll finally be free. And then, it'll just be us. No more waiting, no more hiding." Faith clung to those words, repeating them to herself whenever doubt crept in. She told herself this wasn't just about passion, it was about freedom, about finally breaking free from the constraints of her life. But in reality, it was Caleb's manipulation and her own spiraling obsession that had driven her to the edge. As the day of the murder approached, Faith's anticipation was palpable. She rehearsed her alibi, ensuring her role would remain undetected. She believed she had covered every angle, accounted for every possibility. What she didn't realize was that her carefully constructed plan was far from perfect. And the fallout would be unlike anything she could have imagined. The morning of the murder dawned like any other, the Alabama sun casting a warm glow over the Reynolds household. Faith Reynolds moved through the motions of her day with practiced ease, her every action calculated to appear normal. Her children, 13-year-old Natalie, 9-year-old Serena, and 11-year-old Lucas, had no idea their mother was harboring a dark secret. Faith gathered the children for a day out, masking her inner turmoil with smiles and casual conversation. She drove them to a nearby park, where Lucas excitedly chased his sisters while Natalie and Serena alternated between teasing each other and scrolling through their phones. Faith kept her gaze on her watch, timing every moment with precision. "Mom, are we going to Dad's precinct later?" Lucas asked, his bright eyes filled with excitement. "Not today, sweetie," Faith replied smoothly, her voice betraying none of the tension coiled in her chest. "He's busy with work." Mark Reynolds, meanwhile, was at home, enjoying a rare day off. Faith's instructions to the hitman had been meticulous, down to the hour when Mark would be alone. She had ensured that his usual habits would remain unchanged, presenting no red flags. At precisely 11:47 a.m., the hitman, known only as D, approached the Reynolds home. He carried one of Mark's stolen firearms, a chilling irony that marked the betrayal as deeply personal. Using the key Faith had left hidden under a flower pot, something she'd arranged weeks in advance, D let himself in. Mark was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and flipping through the morning paper. He looked up at the sound of the door opening, confusion flickering across his face. "Can I help you?" Mark asked, his tone calm but firm. D didn't answer. He raised the gun and fired. The sound echoed through the empty house, cutting through the air like a scream. Mark collapsed, his coffee cup shattering on the tiled floor beside him. The hitman didn't linger. Following Faith's instructions, he wiped down any surfaces he might have touched and exited through the back door, slipping into Faith's car and driving off. At the park, Faith glanced at her phone. It was 12:03 p.m. She knew it was done. For a moment, her stomach turned, and a flicker of doubt surfaced. But Caleb's words echoed in her mind, "This is for us. You're doing the right thing." She shoved the thought aside, her expression unchanging as she called to her children. "Come on, kids. Time to head home," she said, her voice cheerful and steady. The drive back was uneventful, the children chatting about their morning while Faith remained silent, her grip on the steering wheel tight. As they pulled into the driveway, the house stood quiet and unassuming, betraying nothing of the horror that had unfolded inside. Faith led the children inside, her heart pounding as she stepped into the kitchen. She gasped loudly, her hands flying to her mouth as she took in the scene. "Mark," she screamed, her voice cracking with feigned anguish. Natalie froze in the doorway, her phone slipping from her hand as she stared at her father's lifeless body. Serena began to sob, clinging to her brother, while Lucas stood motionless, his face pale with shock. Faith knelt by Mark's body, careful not to touch anything that might implicate her. Tears streamed down her face, the performance of a grieving widow so convincing it would have fooled anyone. "Call 911, she shouted, her voice trembling. Natalie fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. When the paramedics and police arrived, Faith's act continued. She clung to her children, her sobs loud and unrelenting. To anyone watching, she was a woman shattered by the sudden, violent loss of her husband. Detective Clara Martinez, who had worked with Mark on several cases, arrived on the scene and immediately began asking questions. Faith recounted their day at the park, her voice trembling as she described walking into the horror that awaited them. She emphasized Mark's dedication to his work, painting a picture of a loving husband and father who had no known enemies. "I don't understand," she cried, clutching her chest as if the grief were too much to bear. "Who would do this to him? He was a good man. A good man." The children, still in shock, corroborated Faith's story without hesitation. They had no reason to suspect their mother, no inkling of the dark secret she was hiding behind her tears. As the investigators worked, Faith retreated to the living room with her children, pulling them close as they wept together. She played her role flawlessly, ensuring that no one would question her grief or her innocence. But behind the mask of devastation, Faith felt a chilling sense of detachment. The man who had shared her life for 19 years lay dead in the next room, and she felt nothing. The only emotion she allowed herself was relief, that the plan had gone exactly as she and Caleb had envisioned. For now, she was untouchable. Or so she thought. The investigation into Mark Reynolds' murder began with the assumption that his work as a police officer had put him in harm's way. The initial theory pointed toward a potential retaliation from a past case, but as investigators delved deeper, subtle inconsistencies began to emerge, pointing to a far more personal motive. Detective Clara Martinez, who had worked closely with Mark, was assigned to lead the investigation. Mark was well liked among his colleagues, and his murder sent shockwaves through the department. Clara started by interviewing Faith, who claimed she had been at the park with her children when the murder occurred. Her story was corroborated by casual witnesses at the park, and initially, nothing seemed out of place. However, Clara couldn't ignore Faith's demeanor, grief-stricken yet oddly composed, as though she had rehearsed her responses. The first significant lead came when forensic analysis revealed that the bullets used in the murder matched firearms stolen from Mark's personal collection. Faith had reported the guns missing weeks before the murder, citing concerns about neighborhood safety. Clara found it strange that a judge and the wife of a police officer wouldn't follow standard protocol for reporting stolen firearms. Clara's suspicions deepened when financial records revealed that Mark had a life insurance policy worth over $500,000, with Faith as the sole beneficiary. Further scrutiny uncovered that Faith had recently made inquiries about claiming the policy, an unusual move for someone who had just lost their spouse. This discovery shifted the focus of the investigation toward Faith and her potential motive. Still, Clara needed more concrete evidence to move forward. A court order was obtained to access Faith's phone records, banking on the possibility that her digital footprint might reveal more about her actions in the weeks leading up to the murder. The recovered data proved explosive. Messages between Faith and Caleb Foster, a convicted murderer serving a life sentence, painted a damning picture. What began as flirtatious exchanges had evolved into detailed discussions about Mark's habits, vulnerabilities, and the potential financial gains of his death. One recovered text exchange was particularly incriminating. "Caleb, the insurance will set us up. You're doing this for us." "Faith, he comes home for lunch at noon. The back door is the blind spot. This has to be clean." These messages revealed that Faith had been coordinating with Caleb for months, sharing intimate details about Mark's routine and even logistical advice on how to carry out the murder. To Clara, it was clear that Faith wasn't just complicit, she was the architect of the plan. The next piece of the puzzle came when investigators traced Faith's communication with Mr. Harris, a highly respected school principal who was rumored to have a secret life as a broker for illegal services. Faith had approached Harris to hire a hitman, promising Mark's firearms as partial payment and a bonus from the life insurance payout. At first, Harris denied any involvement, but when presented with the recovered messages, he folded under pressure. "She came to me with everything planned out," Harris admitted during interrogation. "She said it was about freedom and starting fresh. I didn't ask questions, I just made the connection." Harris described how Faith had handed over detailed instructions for the hitman, including videos of the house and Mark's routine. He also revealed how Faith had orchestrated the use of her own car, under the guise of needing repairs, to ensure the hitman had untraceable transportation. The evidence against Faith was now overwhelming. Her stolen firearms were linked to the murder, her messages outlined the plot, and Harris's confession tied everything together. The story of Faith's betrayal was laid bare. A respected judge had not only conspired to kill her husband but had enlisted trusted members of the community in her scheme. As the truth came to light, the community's reaction was one of collective outrage and disbelief. Faith Reynolds, once a symbol of justice and integrity, was revealed to be the mastermind of a heinous crime fueled by greed and obsession. Mark's colleagues were devastated, grappling with the betrayal of someone they had respected and trusted. For the Reynolds children, the revelations shattered their lives, leaving them to navigate the devastating reality of their father's murder and their mother's culpability. The investigation's methodical unraveling of Faith's carefully constructed plan was a testament to Detective Martinez's dedication and persistence. What had initially seemed like a random act of violence was, in fact, a chillingly calculated betrayal, one that left a community forever scarred. The case against Faith Reynolds reached a turning point as investigators pieced together the overwhelming evidence of her involvement in Mark's murder. For weeks, Detective Clara Martinez and her team had worked tirelessly, uncovering damning messages, forensic links, and critical testimony from Mr. Harris. Now, it was time to confront Faith and hold her accountable for the betrayal that had shocked the community. Faith, unaware that her carefully constructed plan had unraveled, continued her facade as a grieving widow. She attended memorial services for Mark, offered tearful interviews to local news outlets, and even organized community vigils in his honor. To those who didn't know the truth, she appeared as a shattered wife trying to hold her family together. But behind closed doors, investigators were preparing to bring her to justice. The decision to arrest Faith was not made lightly. Prosecutors and law enforcement wanted to ensure their case was airtight, knowing the public scrutiny a case like this would face. Once Mr. Harris's confession and the recovered digital evidence were presented to the district attorney, the arrest warrant was finalized. Faith's arrest was strategically planned to minimize chaos and ensure the safety of her children. On a quiet Tuesday morning, as Faith prepared to leave her home to attend a courthouse meeting, she was met by a team of officers led by Detective Martinez. The children, Natalie, Serena, and Lucas, were at school, sparing them from witnessing their mother's arrest. When Faith opened the door, her confident demeanor faltered at the sight of uniformed officers and Clara standing at the forefront. Clara's expression was firm but professional. "Faith Reynolds," she said, her voice steady. "You're under arrest for the murder of Mark Reynolds, theft of firearms, and obstruction of justice." Faith's face went pale, and for a brief moment, she appeared to consider protesting. But as the weight of her situation sank in, she simply nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. The officers handcuffed her, reading her rights as Clara watched in silence. Faith said nothing as she was escorted to the waiting patrol car, her composed exterior giving way to a look of quiet resignation. The news of Faith's arrest spread quickly, leaving the town in shock. The revelation that the respected judge and grieving widow was, in fact, the mastermind behind Mark's murder left the community reeling. Mark's colleagues in the police department were devastated, while friends and neighbors struggled to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the monstrous actions she had taken. Faith's trial became a national spectacle, drawing attention from media outlets across the country. Courtroom sketches and sensational headlines painted her as the archetype of betrayal, a woman who had used her intelligence, influence, and legal knowledge to orchestrate her husband's death. The prosecution's case was built on an unshakable foundation of evidence. They presented the stolen firearms, the text messages between Faith and Caleb, and the detailed plans she had provided to the hitman. Prosecutors described Faith as a manipulative and calculating woman who had not only betrayed her husband but also her children, her community, and her oath to uphold justice. She used her legal expertise not to serve justice, the lead prosecutor stated during closing arguments, but to defy it in the most heinous way possible. Her actions were deliberate, cold, and entirely devoid of remorse. Faith's defense team attempted to paint her as a victim of Caleb's manipulation, arguing that she had been emotionally coerced into the plan. They portrayed Caleb as a dangerous and persuasive criminal who had preyed on Faith's vulnerabilities. But the evidence against her was insurmountable. The jury saw through the defense's narrative, recognizing Faith's active role in orchestrating Mark's murder. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Faith Reynolds was found guilty of first-degree murder, theft of firearms, and obstruction of justice. The judge, citing the egregious nature of her crimes and her betrayal of the public's trust, handed down a life sentence for the murder charge. She was also sentenced to 10 years for theft of firearms and 2 years for obstruction of justice, with all sentences running concurrently. The hitman, identified during the trial as a low-level enforcer with a history of petty crimes, had pleaded guilty early in the investigation. His cooperation and testimony earned him some leniency, but he was still sentenced to 20 years in prison for his role in Mark's murder. Faith's conviction sent shockwaves through the community. The woman who had once been a beacon of justice and integrity was now a convicted murderer, her fall from grace as dramatic as it was devastating. For Mark's children, the trial and sentencing marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of a lifelong struggle to make sense of the betrayal that had torn their family apart. As Faith was led out of the courtroom in shackles, the community was left to grapple with the enormity of her crimes and the scars she had left behind. The trial served as a grim reminder of how greed, obsession, and betrayal could destroy even the most seemingly perfect lives. The revelation of Faith Reynolds' crimes sent shockwaves through the small Alabama, leaving a community grappling with the weight of betrayal. Faith had been more than just a respected judge, she was a symbol of justice, fairness, and authority. Her actions not only shattered her own family but also fractured the trust that the town had placed in its leaders. Discussions about morality, power, and the abuse of trust became widespread. Faith's fall from grace was the topic of church sermons, town hall meetings, and quiet conversations over dinner tables. Residents questioned how someone entrusted with upholding the law could commit such heinous acts. The betrayal cut deeply, not just because of the crime itself, but because of who Faith had been. A pillar of the community who had used her position to orchestrate the ultimate injustice. Mark's colleagues in the police department struggled to come to terms with the loss of one of their own and the fact that his killer had been the person he trusted most. "We worked alongside her, respected her," one officer said during an interview. "She didn't just betray Mark, she betrayed all of us." For Faith's 3 children, Natalie, Serena, and Lucas, the aftermath was particularly devastating. Losing their father to such a violent act was traumatic enough, but learning that their mother was responsible for his death shattered their sense of safety and trust. The once lively Reynolds home became a silent reminder of everything they had lost. Relatives stepped in to provide stability, but the emotional scars ran deep. Natalie took on a protective role for her younger siblings, trying to shield Serena and Lucas from the relentless media attention and whispered rumors at school. Serena struggled with feelings of anger and confusion, often retreating into silence. Lucas was left grappling with questions no child should ever have to face. "How could Mom do this?" he asked one night, his voice breaking. Natalie had no answer, only pulling him close as they both cried. The community rallied around the children, offering support and kindness, but the weight of their parents' legacy was inescapable. They would forever be known as the children of Mark Reynolds, the dedicated officer whose life was stolen, and Faith Reynolds, the judge who betrayed him. Meanwhile, Caleb Foster remained behind bars, untouched by the storm raging outside. When questioned about his role in the crime, he showed no remorse, dismissing his manipulation of Faith as her choice. "I didn't make her do anything she didn't want to do," Caleb said in an interview with investigators. His chilling detachment became a stark reminder of the dangerous influence he had wielded over Faith. For the community, Caleb's lack of remorse was both infuriating and haunting. He had used his charisma to ensnare Faith, pushing her to commit an act that destroyed everything she had built. Caleb's actions became a cautionary tale, a warning of how obsession and manipulation could drive people to the brink. Faith's conviction and Caleb's role in the crime sparked broader conversations about power dynamics, the vulnerability of even the most seemingly strong individuals, and the need for accountability in positions of authority. The town was left to pick up the pieces, its sense of security forever altered by the betrayal that had unfolded in their midst. The Reynolds children, despite the overwhelming challenges, clung to the memory of their father, a man who had dedicated his life to serving and protecting others. His colleagues and friends ensured that his legacy lived on, creating a scholarship in his name to support aspiring police officers. As time passed, the town began to heal, but the scars left by Faith's actions remained a reminder of how quickly trust can be shattered. The story of Mark and Faith Reynolds became a tragic chapter in the community's history, one that would not be forgotten. For Natalie, Serena, and Lucas, the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but they carried with them the love and dedication their father had shown them, a legacy of resilience and strength in the face of unimaginable loss. This is a story that forces us to confront the chilling depths of human betrayal. Faith Reynolds, a woman who had dedicated her life to upholding the law, used her knowledge and influence to orchestrate the ultimate act of injustice. Her actions not only claimed the life of her husband, Mark, but shattered the lives of her children and left a community forever scarred. The devastation she left behind will echo for generations, a haunting reminder of how obsession and manipulation can destroy even the strongest of bonds. Could Faith's descent into obsession and betrayal have been prevented? And what does this tragic case teach us about the dangers of unchecked power, manipulation, and the choices we make when blinded by our darkest impulses? If this story shocked you, like and subscribe to Shocking True Crime Stories for more harrowing tales that delve into the darkest corners of betrayal, obsession, and human behavior.